The Galactic Empire, a fearsome organization intent on bending every system to its will, led by a Sith Lord who orchestrated the overthrow of the Republic and his own rise to power, its greatest weapons supervised by a cunning, ruthless commander, its intelligence division made up of insightful and dedicated officers, and its troops led by one of the most intimidating figures to ever grace the silver screen. Or, in Obi-Wan Kenobi, a bunch of useless idiots. Villains within the Star Wars universe rarely exist in a vacuum. They are typically part of a larger organization. Thus, the creators of any given Star Wars production have an obligation not only to tell the story of a particular hero and villain, but also to portray the systems within which those characters operate. Andor is an example of this concept executed to near perfection. The Imperial system depicted in the show meshes fluidly with the Empire we see in the original trilogy, while also innovating, bringing new ideas and characters to the universe. Obi-Wan Kenobi's Empire fails to live up to any standard of competence or logic. The show focuses exclusively on the main characters with hardly any consideration on the overall system, making it seem like the Empire is made up of morons who couldn't manage a lemonade stand. To demonstrate this point, we will compare two sets of scenes from the shows. First up are the Aldhani heist and the incursion into Fortress Inquisitorius. Why?
I don't see any shields.
That's because no one would be stupid enough to attack them.
That's why they only keep a 40-man regiment in the garrison.
Because they know no one's stupid enough to try it.
On the face of it, these lines seem to pretty much mean the same thing. The Empire is overly confident and thus is vulnerable. That is incorrect. When Cassian says,
"No one's stupid enough to try it,"
he is insinuating that these rebels with whom he is now entangled are planning a suicide mission, whereas Roken's comment was more of a general statement about the supposed strength of the fortress and its inhabitants. But there's more to it than that. Cassian's forceful declaration follows a statement on the size of the Aldhani garrison, which is rather small. This is because foot soldiers on the ground at Aldhani are in fact only there to prevent the sort of feat which the rebels are about to attempt. And since a heist of this manner is seemingly impossible, there is only a token force allocated to the base. This should make us ask the question, why is a theft of the vault inconceivable? Well, because the thieves would almost certainly have to fly out of there with the stolen credits, and there's an airbase nearby that would dispatch TIE fighters to easily destroy any craft attempting to leave the atmosphere, that is, in all circumstances but the one the rebels intend to exploit. We see these TIE fighters patrolling, buzzing the rebels who they believe to be shepherds, keeping sharp and practicing their skills. When the heist begins in earnest and alarms begin to go off, the airbase is alerted and immediately scrambles fighters. This happens despite the fact that no enemy ships have been spotted. There is no air threat, and yet they get ties in the air anyway, because Andor's empire is one in which preparedness and careful planning are of the utmost importance. Any potential weakness must be identified and remediated. The only reason the rebels succeed is because the Empire failed to account for the effects on their air support of an event that happens only once every 3 years. The rebels had to be smart, opportunistic, timely, and a bit lucky in order to exploit the one weakness in the Empire's defenses. One that, we can safely assume, will be patched through additional security and safeguards. The overwhelming response to the Aldhani incident that we see the ISB take tells the audience in no uncertain terms that this empire means business, that they are obsessed with not only projecting the image of strength, but with backing up that image with significant force. They do not take such rebellious acts lightly. They respond with a heavy hand to ensure this sort of thing never happens again. Which is exactly what Obi-Wan Kenobi's empire doesn't do. I am, of course, referring to Obi-Wan sneaking into Fortress Inquisitorius. If you're an OG of the channel, you'll remember me bashing this scene for being a ripoff of Jedi Fallen Order, a game set 5 years before the events of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and one which had its protagonist invade the fortress through an underwater airlock. In the show, this same exact method of entry is made possible by Tala opening a port after she pulls the absurdly silly "do you know who I am" routine on the security guard, and then somehow, despite being an officer stationed on a remote planet who does not even have the level of access necessary to get into the fortress, is able to access a computer and the base's schematics and door controls. Because Obi-Wan Kenobi's empire apparently doesn't have the slightest understanding of the principle of least privilege, despite being fanatically organized and rule-driven. There's no logic here, just the show getting the characters where they need to go. You may also remember how there were 2 Star Destroyers in orbit around Nur in Jedi Fallen Order, which is Star Wars canon in case you were wondering. And then they, as well as the neighboring planet, simply disappeared sometime between Jedi Fallen Order and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Look, show, it's not that hard to sneak past a Star Destroyer. It's the 3rd most common Star Wars trope after Skywalkers losing limbs and planets being blown up. And Tala is flying an Imperial ship for crying out loud, so it would hardly be a stretch. But no, we're just going to say that the Empire, after this crucial base was attacked, chose to not increase security, but rather sent those Star Destroyers off into the ether because reasons.
Not a great plan.
Oh, and the game also had a whole scene with the tunnel glass breaking and causing a flood. Sound familiar? So, after Cal's rampage through the Inquisitor's base, what exactly did the Empire do to stop such a catastrophe from reoccurring? Easy. They made security worse. Goodbye, Star Destroyers. Farewell, shield. Do we reinforce the tunnel walls? Nah, no design flaw there. We're totally fine having a single blaster bolt from an E11 cause a crack that leads to major flooding. Hey, at least they have the TIE fighters ready. Remember how we established that, in Andor, these TIEs would be, and were, scrambled as soon as an alarm went off, because the Empire knows the invaders have to escape through the air. Right, well, you would think that the assumption would apply here. This is, after all, the same Empire, right? The second that Fortress Inquisitorius security hears a Jedi is in the base, they should, if they don't absolutely suck at their jobs, have TIE pilots in their fighters within moments to cut off any potential escape or rescue. But they don't because, well, the writers wanted to have snowspeeders show up to save the day, and thus we couldn't have any Imperial ships in the vicinity causing problems. So this begs the question, what would have happened if a Y-Wing decided to show up? The fortress and all its inhabitants would be in a million pieces on the bottom of the ocean. That's what. And we can't even defend this empire by saying that they were counting on the base's secrecy. They knew, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that their enemies were aware of Fortress Inquisitorius, but chose to leave it defenseless because
no one would be stupid enough to attack them.
That line only makes any sort of sense if the base is actually heavily protected, which it very well should be, considering its history and its occupants. But it's not, because according to the Obi-Wan show, the Empire is populated by a bunch of complete idiots. So, Obi-Wan Kenobi's Imperials are stupid. However, did you know that they're also just flat-out incompetent in the field, too? Look, Stormtroopers have gotten a bad rap. Their feigned incompetence at Vader's directions gave them a bad aim name that they really didn't deserve.
Only Imperial stormtroopers are so precise.
Losing to a bunch of teddy bears didn't help, and is quite honestly one of the worst parts of the original trilogy, but at least the Ewoks employed some creativity when they took on the Empire on Andor. They used their home moon advantage to set up various traps that are actually somewhat believable, even if stormtroopers getting knocked out by a rock to the helmet isn't. By contrast, Obi-Wan Kenobi employs zero creativity when the path faces off against the Empire in one of the most atrociously shot and directed fight scenes in history. Again, I've already bashed this scene into a million pieces in a previous video, so I'll just hit the highlights here. Basically, the two sides just stand out in the open and shoot at each other, and I think one good guy dies on screen. This shot of Roken is all you need to see to know that the director of this scene just went, yeah, whatever, throw some flashing lights in and no one will care. How can you watch this scene and not think that Imperial stormtroopers are anything but a complete and total joke? They have absolutely no reason to hold back. The Empire wants every one of the path dead, and yet the troopers simply miss everything except this shield, because apparently they are just the worst at their jobs. That's a problem. We don't need stormtroopers to be an existential threat to our main characters, but they need to have some weight behind them, some consequences to their actions. They should pose a threat to somebody. When the masked infantry of the Empire shows up, it should mean something to the audience, should make us go, okay, things are getting serious. Stormtroopers shouldn't be mere cannon fodder because the show needs faceless bad guys to kill. That's just cheap and lazy writing. We've grown beyond that. Andor understands this. Note how sparingly stormtroopers are used throughout the show. They are present only on a few occasions, most notably when Cassian is caught in an Imperial crackdown, and then again in the finale on Rick's Road. This riot scene is just a perfect use of stormtroopers, a masterclass in building tension through character design and blocking. On the ground, face to face with the citizens of Ferrix, we have the basic Imperial security forces. They are the ones tasked with calming the populace, ideally without the use of violence. The position of the stormtroopers, these masked, imposing figures above the crowd, in positions where they can observe the situation more comprehensively, tells the audience that they are not there to interface with the people of Ferrix, but as a backup should things go south for the Empire. They are crowd control of the brutal and fatal variety. And guess what? They're actually relatively good at their jobs. Turns out, low recoil energy weapons are not, in fact, that hard to aim, especially when aiming into a mass of humanity. These stormtroopers would be hard-pressed to miss considering how target-rich their environment is. And yet, somehow, these are the same sort of soldiers that couldn't hit the rebels who didn't even bother taking cover. And those troopers were ones chosen to accompany an Inquisitor on a mission to capture or kill a Jedi, not merely those picked to quell the inklings of a rebellion on a barely significant system. You can't possibly show these two properties to a viewer and expect them to believe that these are the same stormtroopers, not literally of course, but generally, and that this is the same Empire. Emperor Palpatine is a master manipulator, a man who seized control of the entire galaxy through meticulous planning and perfect execution. Do you really think he would allow some of his most valuable assets to leave their base undefended, and that he would accept his crack troops' complete lack of competence in the field? That is to say, do you want the bad guys to be buffoons whom our heroes can simply walk over? Or do you want them to be intelligent, capable adversaries that will demand the protagonists use wits, skill, and creativity in order to defeat them? I know which Star Wars I want to watch. However, I will say one thing in defense of buffoonery. Please note that this is not a story angle the Obi-Wan show actually leaned into, but rather a generous interpretation I am making that, if actually explored in the show or in future Star Wars properties, could be quite interesting. The idea is simple. The Inquisitors, drunk on their own idea of their power, their egos inflated by the status they have gained within the Empire, act in a foolhardy manner when chasing down Jedi. Their rage and ambition blind them to some extent and preclude the careful planning that the ISB holds so dear. This idea is espoused to some extent in Jedi Survivor.
Denvik's going big these days.
Can you blame me? Competition for funding is getting fierce.
If you ask me, the Inquisitorius isn't worth the credit. The ISB's track record is far superior.
A relic, that's what they...
Due to heightened security, this hangar is restricted. All traffic will reroute to tertiary landing pads for enhanced inspection until further notice.
The contrast and rivalry between the Inquisitors and the ISB could absolutely make for an interesting theme. If Obi-Wan Kenobi had leaned more heavily into the Inquisitors' arrogance and overconfidence, and actually presented how these elements affected their decisions, it would have contrasted nicely with Andor's depiction of the meticulous, thorough ISB. However, there's a fine line between hubris and absolute stupidity. Thinking you, an Inquisitor, can take Obi-Wan Kenobi in a lightsaber duel is hubris. Dismissing all the security for your base after it's already suffered a significant attack is pure lunacy. Where Andor's Imperials were smart, capable, and fleshed out, Obi-Wan Kenobi's Empire was a hollow husk almost completely devoid of logic or reason. Andor made the Empire truly terrifying by showing it to be populated by people who felt real, who cared about their jobs, their careers, and the mission of the Empire. The audience got a sense of the reasoning behind every decision made by these Imperials, a glance inside the regime struggling to gain and maintain control in this vast galaxy, a regime that will do anything to hold on to power. In Obi-Wan Kenobi, people pretty much just ran around doing things as the plot required, even if getting from A to B made no sense whatsoever. The Empire wasn't scary, it was a joke. Also, it was apparently broke. How do I know that? Well, I can count 3 times when a Star Destroyer simply disappeared because apparently they're too expensive to keep on hand. First, I've already mentioned the ones over Noor. Second, in the following episode, Vader is aboard a Star Destroyer while Reva faces off against the Path. I don't know why he's waiting, but whatever. And then the Path ship is simply allowed to leave once Reva's shut the hangar door plan fails. Where did that Star Destroyer and its legion of TIE fighters go, you ask? Shut up, says Disney. Third, after Obi-Wan bests Vader and inexplicably leaves him alive, because the plot demands it, the Star Destroyer that Vader diverted to chase after Obi-Wan, for some reason, is once again simply gone. Where? Go away, says Lucasfilm. No logic, no cause and effect, no setup and payoff, just we need characters to get from here to here, so let's make it happen. I have to wonder whether no one in the writer's room stood up and objected to these absurdities. You're getting paid to write these stories, people. Please do better. Well, that's that. The channel recently passed its first upload anniversary, so I thought I'd go back to my roots and make a comparison video bashing the Obi-Wan Kenobi show. If you can't tell by now, that show disappointed me on a level that basically no other Star Wars property did. But on the bright side, it ended up creating this channel, which has grown beyond my wildest dreams. So thank you for watching, whether you've watched all of my videos or only this one. And my next Star Wars video will be about Jedi Survivor, and I'm so excited to talk about that game because it's actually good. Anyhow, thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next one.